So let's go back. I definitely want us to have the structure of the faith. First and foremost, it came directly from what human being? Muhammad. And Muhammad got all of his information directly from God or Allah, at least according to Muhammad. And we have no way to doubt him, and we have no reason to doubt him. And that was only 600 odd years before Christ. So it's a very young religion. Their faith is based on 5 tenets, and you see those on your sheet there. The Arabic or Arabic wording for these 5 is almost unpronounceable for me, but in English they are belief, and it's a kind of a witnessing or a statement of belief. And you may remember the sentence that I shared with you, where you basically, the belief is, I believe there's one God, and that's Allah, and Allah spoke directly to Muhammad, and Muhammad is the only prophet, and it's just a sentence, a statement of belief. And that is the fundamental of their belief. And prayer, we talked about how helpful that is. How many times do they pray?
5.
Yes. And if you are Muslim and do not pray 5 times every day like I showed you, you'll go to jail. The percentage of Muslims who pray once a day is, so some of that's on there, but we might get to that later. But that doesn't mean that it's not a part of their faith. Is prayer a part of Christian faith?
Mm-hmm.
How often are we supposed to pray?
Without ceasing.
Good job. Without ceasing. That's 24/7. How are we doing? Yeah. So a tenet is a tenet, but a practice may not be. So that's definitely one of their tenets. Fasting, and remember that their fasting is not, I think in our society, when we hear about fasting, we have a tendency to think it is for long periods of time, like starvation kind of fasting or whatever. And it's more like from sunup to sundown. And then in the evening, then they will eat. During Ramadan, they fast like that the entire month. But it's not, and I truly thought until not too long ago, just several years ago, I actually thought that they went almost without food the whole month. And can you see why people might think that? You know, we fast during the month of Ramadan. Early on, I don't apologize. If you know me at all, you know I just absolutely adore Wesley. Not for his personality, but for the stuff he gave us. And when I knew that Wesley fasted 3 times a week, I thought, I wish I could do that, but I can't do that. Well, John Wesley didn't eat until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Educators call that Monday. Not eating until late afternoon or dinner is not at all unusual for a lot of people because of their work or whatever. So, and I'm not making fun of it, I'm just saying our perception of fasting, I want you to be aware that it covers a lot of territory there. Anything about those things I've shared so far? Questions that you've had about it? Tell me that if I didn't have these 5 listed, you still could call them out.
No.
In time, you might, yeah. So what did we learn about charity? Are they for it or against it? Well, don't all speak at once. They are for it, and they basically are obligated to do what? Annually.
Go to Mesa? Go to Mecca?
No.
Not for it's a charity, but you're on the right track. Hold that answer. They're to give 2.5%
Oh,
of their income. It's not a suggestion. And it's not, like Christians are fond of saying, well, is that on the gross or the net? Mickey Eford would say you're asking the wrong question if that's your question. But seriously, that is an expectation, and it's not taken lightly. But they also then give donations above and beyond that. For example, a lot of the Christians I know give a specific kind of weekly or monthly tithe to the church. But that doesn't mean they don't give to the American Red Cross or UNICEF or, they give to other worthy causes in addition. They don't say, oh, I hit my 5% and I said that's all I could afford, so I can't give you any money. So we're not all that different, except for the fact that ours is very much a personal choice, and it is not shared. It's not given out as any kind of information. Okay, Ted, tell us what you learned about the pilgrimage.
I don't know that I have.
Well, you just said it a minute ago.
But I don't know what the requirements are.
You just remember Mecca.
Yes.
Okay, well, where did this religion that we've been learning about begin?
Mecca.
Muhammad was born in Mecca, right? And so Mecca is the holy of holies, so to speak, for the Islam religion, even though Jerusalem is certainly high on their list. Islamic people are to, there's an annual trip to Mecca. The Hajj. It's not spelled like H-O-D-G-E, but it's pronounced like Hajj. The Hajj is annual, and all Muslims are required to go. How often?
Once in a lifetime.
Once in a lifetime.
Good, yeah. Once in their lifetime. Just once in my lifetime. Yeah, one time. So, it's a requirement. So how many people have gone?
No.
I've got it on my computer, and again, if time allows, I may share some of these odd pieces of information. I was fascinated looking at the various countries, but they're countries where the Islam population, it's 1% have gone, 2% have gone. I was really surprised. 17%, up over 30% is almost unheard of. So it sounds like, we have rules about jaywalking, but doesn't mean people are following them. So those are the 5 tenets. Again, if you are a faithful, practicing Muslim of the Islam faith, those are the 5 things that you will be invested in and you will practice. And you would be taught what the fundamental practice would be of each of those things. Do you remember our discussion about how the Islamic peoples, and again, I'm talking as a religion, not as the person you meet going down the hall, how the Islamic people feel about Jesus?
A prophet. A prophet.
How does he rank with Muhammad?
Lower.
Everything's lower than Muhammad.
And who ranks higher than Jesus?
Muhammad.
Who ranks in between?
God.
No, God's way on up there. But no, I was tricking you and it didn't come out very well. Muhammad is the prophet, the greatest prophet ever. And then the next prophet is Jesus. Yeah. Do you think many people here at WhiteStone, for example, would know that?
No.
Is that worth knowing? I think that's worth the whole workshop, frankly.
Yeah.
They have a tremendous reverence for Jesus. And I think you were surprised, I didn't spend a lot of time on it, but the Quran is filled with things that come all but right out of our Bible. And you said, well, the Old Testament. Remember I read from a book called what? Mary. Where do we find Mary's story in our Bible? Not in the Old Testament.
New Testament.
New Testament. So you can't have a great reverence for Jesus and have him as your number 2 prophet if you don't have any knowledge of that information. And so it's fascinating to realize that. Again, the fact that they have such respect for the Quran and our Bible, that they will not put them lower than waist high typically. Waist high. So I'm trying to think, anything else before we move on to somewhat new information that you've had a chance to think about? I guess the 2 things right now I would want us to take away are that there's very little about their basic faith that we would have a problem with, and their reverence for Jesus, except for that pesky little thing called resurrection, is something that is really worth knowing. And then to know, third, that the fact that this is an Islamic religion it's just like Christianity in that it is from the extreme to doing every bit of it faithfully every day to knowing how to spell Islam. It's that varied, pretty much like Christianity. So that's about where we are right now. I want us, unless anybody has something they want to share or ask, and I hope you'll ask questions and I won't know the answer and I'll write them down and I'll get us the answers.
I feel that the men have more religion than the women do. The women do not participate in a lot of the activities, and the men do. So the women are home cooking.
That's an interesting thought. It varies from country to country. In fact, I read something not too long ago that talked about, and I think it was specific to an area, so I don't want to mislead you, that the women were more, it was like 2 to 1 almost, as far as being involved in the mosque, etc. But I know there's a reason I'm remembering that wasn't like overall. And like everything else, is if you have been a part of a regular church, whatever that means, in the last 20 years, has it changed any from when you were a kid or when your mother was first married? Who ran the churches in the United States?
The women.
The women. Now, the men made all the decisions, which is exactly right. But the women were free to come during the day to work on meals, to work on this, to prepare Sunday school, to do. Where are those women today? I know they're dead. I didn't mean that.
Working.
Those, the home managers, the domestic divas, whatever is acceptable to call them, the homemakers. What percentage of women today are homemakers? It's changed drastically, hasn't it? So there's a method to my madness. I'm bringing that around to what Ted was saying. Do you suppose that in the last 100 years, there's been impact on Islamic traditions as well? Yes. The Imam at Duke was, his wife was a physician at Chapel Hill Hospital. That doesn't sound like what we would have thought, a few hundred years ago. So, what I'd like for us to do now is to, and it comes with what you were saying, Ted, really this whole idea of the difference in men and women. And I'll be honest with you, when I've been in a mosque and the women are upstairs in a room, kind of like this, and the men are downstairs, that don't sit real well with me. It just doesn't. But it's okay. I'm sure that I do things that wouldn't sit real well with them either. So I want you to hear from a female in modern times talk about what it's like to do. I thought that'd be a lot more interesting than me reading to you about something that someone said. So I'm going to get out of your way, and my right and left hand are going to turn on the video, and I'm going to get the lights.
What do you think when you look at me? A woman of faith, an expert, maybe even a sister, or oppressed, brainwashed, a terrorist, or just an airport security line delay. That one's actually true. If some of your perceptions were negative, I don't really blame you. That's just how the media has been portraying people who look like me. One study found that 80% of news coverage about Islam and Muslims is negative. And studies show that Americans say that most don't know a Muslim. I guess people don't talk to their Uber drivers. Well, for those of you who've never met a Muslim, it's great to meet you. Let me tell you who I am. I'm a mom, a coffee lover, double espresso, cream on the side. I'm an introvert. I'm a wannabe fitness fanatic, and I'm a practicing spiritual Muslim. But not like Lady Gaga says, because baby, I wasn't born this way. It was a choice. When I was 17, I decided to come out. No, not as a gay person like some of my friends, but as a Muslim, and decided to start wearing the hijab, my head covering. My feminist friends were aghast. Why are you oppressing yourself? The funny thing was, it was actually, at that time, a feminist declaration of independence from the pressure I felt as a 17-year-old to conform to a perfect and unattainable standard of beauty. I didn't just passively accept the faith of my parents. I wrestled with the Quran. I read and reflected and questioned and doubted and ultimately believed. My relationship with God, it was not love at first sight. It was a trust and a slow surrender that deepened with every reading of the Quran. Its rhythmic beauty sometimes moves me to tears. I see myself in it. I feel that God knows me. Have you ever felt like someone sees you, completely understands you, and yet loves you anyway? That's how it feels. And so later, I got married, and like all good Egyptians, started my career as an engineer. I later had a child after getting married, and I was living essentially the Egyptian American dream. And then that terrible morning of September 2001. I think a lot of you probably remember exactly where you were that morning. I was sitting in my kitchen, finishing breakfast, and I look up on the screen and see the words breaking news. There was smoke, airplanes flying into buildings, people jumping out of buildings. What was this? An accident? A malfunction? My shock quickly turned to outrage. Who would do this? And I switched the channel and I hear Muslim terrorist, in the name of Islam, Middle Eastern descent, jihad. We should bomb Mecca. Oh my God. Not only had my country been attacked, but in a flash, somebody else's actions had turned me from a citizen to a suspect. That same day, we had to drive across Middle America to move to a new city to start grad school. And I remember sitting in the passenger seat as we drove in silence, crouched as low as I could go in my seat for the first time in my life, afraid for anyone to know I was a Muslim. We moved into our apartment that night in a new town in what felt like a completely different world. And then I was hearing and seeing and reading warnings from national Muslim organizations saying things like, be alert, be aware, stay in well-lit areas, don't congregate. I stayed inside all week. And then it was Friday, that same week, the day that Muslims congregate for worship. And again, the warnings were, don't go that first Friday. It could be a target. And I was watching the news, wall-to-wall coverage. Emotions were so raw, understandably. And I was also hearing about attacks on Muslims, or people who were perceived to be Muslim being pulled out and beaten in the street. Mosques were actually firebombed. And I thought, we should just stay home. And yet, something didn't feel right. Because those people who attacked our country attacked our country. I get it that people were angry at the terrorists. Guess what? So was I. And so to have to explain yourself all the time isn't easy. I don't mind questions. I love questions. It's the accusations that are tough. Today we hear people actually saying things like, there's a problem in this country and it's called Muslims. When are we going to get rid of them? So some people want to ban Muslims and close down mosques. They talk about my community kind of like we're a tumor in the body of America. And the only question is, are we malignant or benign? You know, a malignant tumor you extract altogether, and a benign tumor you just keep under surveillance. The choices don't make sense because it's the wrong question. Muslims, like all other Americans, aren't a tumor in the body of America. We're a vital organ. Thank you. Muslims are inventors and teachers, first responders and Olympic athletes. Now, is closing down mosques going to make America safer? It might free up some parking spots, but it will not end terrorism. Going to a mosque regularly is actually linked to having more tolerant views of people of other faiths and greater civic engagement. And as one police chief in the Washington, D.C. area recently told me, people don't actually get radicalized at mosques. They get radicalized in their basement or bedroom in front of a computer. And what you find about the radicalization process is it starts online, but the first thing that happens is the person gets cut off from their community, from even their family, so that the extremist group can brainwash them into believing that they, the terrorists, are the true Muslims, and everyone else who abhors their behavior and ideology are sellouts or apostates. So if we want to prevent radicalization, we have to keep people going to the mosque. Now, some will still argue Islam is a violent religion. After all, a group like ISIS bases its brutality on the Quran. Now, as a Muslim, as a mother, as a human being, I think we need to do everything we can to stop a group like ISIS. But we would be giving into their narrative if we cast them as representatives of a faith of 1.6 billion people. Thank you. ISIS has as much to do with Islam as the Ku Klux Klan has to do with Christianity. Both groups claim to base their ideology on their holy book. But when you look at them, they're not motivated by what they read in their holy book. It's their brutality that makes them read these things into the scripture. Recently, a prominent imam told me a story that really took me aback. He said that a girl came to him because she was thinking of going to join ISIS. And I was really surprised and asked him, had she been in contact with a radical religious leader? And he said the problem was quite the opposite, that every cleric that she had talked to had shut her down and said that her rage, her sense of injustice in the world, was just going to get her in trouble. And so with nowhere to channel and make sense of this anger, she was a prime target to be exploited by extremists promising her a solution. What this imam did was to connect her back to God and to her community. He didn't shame her for her rage. Instead, he gave her constructive ways to make real change in the world. What she learned at that mosque prevented her from going to join ISIS. And I've told you a little bit about how Islamophobia affects me and my family. But how does it impact ordinary Americans? How does it impact everyone else? How does consuming fear 24 hours a day affect the health of our democracy, the health of our free thought? Well, one study, actually several studies in neuroscience, show that when we're afraid, at least three things happen. We become more accepting of authoritarianism, conformity, and prejudice. One study showed that when subjects were exposed to news stories that were negative about Muslims, they became more accepting of military attacks on Muslim countries and policies that curtail the rights of American Muslims. Now, this isn't just academic. When you look at when anti-Muslim sentiment spiked between 2001 and 2013, it happened 3 times, but it wasn't around terrorist attacks. It was in the run-up to the Iraq War and during 2 election cycles. So Islamophobia isn't just the natural response to Muslim terrorism as I would have expected. It can actually be a tool of public manipulation. eroding the very foundation of a free society, which is rational and well-informed citizens. Muslims are like canaries in the coal mine. We might be the first to feel it, but the toxic air of fear is harming us all. And assigning collective guilt isn't just about having to explain yourself all the time. Dia and his wife, Yusr, were a young married couple living in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where they both went to school. Dia was an athlete, and he was in dental school, talented, promising. And his sister would tell me that he was the sweetest, most generous human being she knew. She was visiting him there, and he showed her his resume, and she was amazed. She said, "When did my baby brother become such an accomplished young man?" Just a few weeks after Suzanne's visit to her brother and his new wife, their neighbor, Craig Stephen Hicks, murdered them, as well as Yusra's sister Roseanne, who was visiting for the afternoon, in their apartment, execution style, after posting anti-Muslim statements on his Facebook page. He shot Dia 8 times. So bigotry isn't just immoral, it can even be lethal. So back to my story. What happened after 9/11? Did we go to the mosque or did we play it safe and stay home? Well, we talked it over, and it might seem like a small decision, but to us it was about what kind of America we wanted to leave for our kids. One that would control us by fear, or one where we were practicing our religion freely. So we decided to go to the mosque, and we put my son in his car seat, buckled him in, and we drove silently, intensely to the mosque. And I took him out, I took off my shoes, I walked into the prayer hall. And what I saw made me stop. The place was completely full. And then the imam made an announcement thanking and welcoming our guests, because half the congregation were Christians, Jews, Buddhists, atheists, people of faith and no faith, who had come not to attack us, but to stand in solidarity with us. I just break down at this time. These people were there because they chose courage and compassion over panic and prejudice. What will you choose? What will you choose at this time of fear and bigotry? Will you play it safe, or will you join those who say, we are better than that? Thank you. Thank you so much.
So, Dalia, you seem to have struck a chord, but I wonder, what would you say to those who might argue that you're giving a TED Talk, you're clearly a deep thinker, you work at a fancy think tank, you're an exception, you're not the rule? What would you say to those people?
I would say, don't let this stage distract you. I'm completely ordinary. I'm not an exception. My story is not unusual. I am as ordinary as they come. When you look at Muslims around the world, and I've done this, I've done the largest study ever done on Muslims around the world. People want ordinary things. They want prosperity for their family, they want jobs, and they want to live in peace. So I am not in any way an exception. When you meet people who seem like an exception to the rule, oftentimes it's that the rule is broken, not that they're an exception to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Dalia, go ahead.
Thank you.
We're going to move right on into another sharing on the idea of Islam as a violent country or a violent faith. I do want to mention something that we probably won't get a chance to talk about. And I'm not sharing it to scare you, I'm not sharing it to motivate you, it's just a fact. What is the fastest growing religion in the United States? Islam. What's the fastest growing religion in the world? Islam. I hope your first thought is, well, I wonder why. I'd want to know, right? And if your second thought is, well, I bet it's because they are doing something to force other people, da-da-da-da-da. You know, the last thing we tend to think of is, what is it, Occam's razor, the simplest reason for something? Occam's razor with the Islamic growth is that who has more babies? Yeah. In the United States, Islam people are having a lot more babies than the Christian races have babies. But that's not the only reason by any stretch. I don't know if this gentleman shares it or if it's something from another time and place that I'm remembering, is that most of the people in the United States that are entering into the Islamic faith are converting from so-called Christianity or no faith or whatever. And that Islamic faith is a young faith. It's young people. Now, I could weave a blanket out of that and think of a million reasons for that. But the percentage of older, like us, I want to say it's something like 6% throughout the world. Anyway, so let's see what, and I must add, if you met someone just like her in another video, could that person tell you totally opposite things? Yeah. Maybe. Certainly some. Yes. So this is a person sharing with you. And this is a person sharing with you about violence and what it does and doesn't have to do with Islamic faith.
Is Islam a religion of violence? Based on an article by Dr. Nazir Khan. The Prophet said, "Worship God the most merciful and spread peace." Muslims believe that Islam clearly condemns violence. But with so much violence committed in the name of religion, many people believe that religion itself is to blame. Some people even think that humanity would be better off without religion, and that religion hinders peace. But a quick look at history shows why this view is factually incorrect. World War I was not about religion, but nationalism. It claimed the lives of 15 million people. World War II was about fascism, and up to 80 million people were killed. Soviet atheism was explicitly against religion, but it resulted in more violence and deaths than any religious battle in human history. 62 million people were murdered under the Soviet regime. And in the past century, European colonialism resulted in the deaths of 50 million people. The bottom line is that it doesn't matter whether an ideology is religious or non-religious. Any ideology becomes a cause for violence when it is imposed by force or when it is used to dehumanize others. And dehumanization, or the denial of the humanity of others, is the step that permits killing with impunity. Today we often see people accusing Muslims of violence because terrorist groups carry out violence in the name of Islam. On the one hand, we have the mainstream followers of Islam, 1.8 billion people, who believe that Islam is a religion of peace and justice. On the other hand, we have a modern terrorist organization that is using the same 5-letter word, Islam, to refer to their violent ideology. When the media uses the word Islam to refer to that violent ideology instead of the peaceful faith of Muslim families around the world, the media ends up siding with the terrorist narrative. This ignores the way 1.8 billion mainstream followers of Islam understand their faith. The mainstream followers who have the right to inform others about what Islam actually means. When we talk about Christianity, we don't consider terrorist organizations like the Lord's Resistance Army in Uganda or the Ku Klux Klan to be the true representatives of what Christianity is. Instead, we go to the mainstream followers of the faith and the consensus of their religious leaders. To mainstream Muslims around the world, Islam represents a spiritual journey towards God through worshiping Him alone and caring for all of God's creation. Mainstream Muslims believe in upholding the values of compassion and mercy as embodied in the Quran and through the practice of the Prophet, peace be upon him. The Quran is very clear in condemning acts of violence and aggression in numerous passages. But terrorists and Islamophobes alike both try to misquote a handful of verses in order to portray Islam as violent. For example, chapter 2, verse 191 is the most frequently misquoted Quranic passage. It is argued that the Quran says, "Kill them wherever you find them." But look at the verses immediately before and after. "Fight in the cause of God those who fight you, and do not commit aggression. Verily, God does not love those who transgress. So kill them," that is your attackers, "wherever you find them, and drive them out from where they have driven you out. But if they cease in fighting, then let there be no hostility except against the oppressors." All of a sudden, it becomes crystal clear that this phrase is referring only to those waging war against you. In fact, the great scholar and cousin of the Prophet, Ibn Abbas, said that this verse means do not attack women, children, elderly, or anyone who is not fighting against you. Sounds exactly like the kind of statement terrorists and Islamophobes will conveniently ignore. Terrorists who use Islam to further their agenda completely disregard any textual and historical context, ignore reputable Islamic scholars, consistently cherry-pick portions of verses to suit their agenda, and even violate the literal command of other explicit texts in the Quran, like the verse, "There is no compulsion in religion." So the terrorists have constructed their own violent ideology they call Islam, but it actually goes against everything that you find in the sources of real Islam, the Holy Quran, and the teachings of the Prophet. The trouble is, the media and many politicians parrot the terrorist narrative by referring to violent criminal groups as radical Islamists, Islamic extremists, and Islamic terrorists. The result, whenever anyone sees a terrorist attack, the one common word everyone instantly thinks of is Islam. Most people agree that the vast majority of the 1.8 billion Muslims are not causing violence. But by using the same word that describes the faith of these 1.8 billion people, they end up lumping them into the same group as the terrorists. So, is Islam a religion of violence? Here are two important conclusions. Number one, Islam categorically denounces violence. The real Islam found in the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet is the same Islam followed by a global faith community of 1.8 billion people who uphold the values of compassion and justice, as we find in numerous verses of the Quran and sayings of the Prophet. It is not the Islam of terrorists. Terrorists manipulate and exploit the religion to serve their own agenda. Even though they use the same word, Islam, they are referring to something completely different, which contradicts everything that mainstream Islam stands for. And number two, religion does not beget violence. Violent movements use whatever ideology they can to further their agenda, whether it's religious or non-religious, including nationalism, fascism, white supremacism, and communism. Any ideology can become an ideology of violence if people use it to dehumanize others. It is ideologies of dehumanization that encourage violence, whereas the Islamic faith of 1.8 billion people around the world preaches peace and compassion.
So with those two videos, any arguments, any insights, any but what abouts? Not so much. Yes, we.
Well, I had heard that in the Quran, that there was a place where it said that all non-believers should be killed. So now this is explaining how they take it back.
And it's interesting that they do that, because when I reflect on my own faith and all those around me that are, quote, Christians, they never do that. Do you know anybody that cherry picks our Bible? Yeah, all the time. Yes, and the parts that we don't like, we just conveniently forget. Now, I don't want to get political. I'm just saying. When you look at the video of January the 6th, and you can decide whoever you think was there, can they be Christian and do what they were doing? Whatever side they're on or whatever. Does our gospel teach that? It doesn't. I know that when she mentioned the Ku Klux Klan, and that was brought up again, I found it interesting. I don't know this, I'd like to know. But if you say those, then if you could identify the Islamic terrorists, the radicals, out of the 101.8 billion, what's that ratio? Is it 1 in a million? Is it 1 in 500,000? I don't know. But when I thought about the Ku Klux Klan that still exists, I bet the percentage of Ku Klux Klanners is much higher. Because there was a time, and Northerners don't think I'm ignoring you, because I don't know that much, but my husband does. You're not lily white either. But down here, the most respectable people in town were members of the Ku Klux Klan. Up until not too long ago. And there's not one thing that you could identify about that would be Christian. Now, am I sharing this to just give you another way of looking at the different religions? Yes. Am I sharing this to make you fall in love with a religion like Islam and decide you want to embrace it? No. But I tell you what, I could sit down and list all day the Christian people that I would not want to live next door to Sarah. Long before I could think of an Islamic person that I wouldn't want to live next door to Sarah. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the things that concerns me, and this goes back to all the years I've dealt with kids. If you don't know why kids join gangs, let me tell you right now, it's as simple as this: for acceptance. Very few people join a gang if they are completely comfortable in their home, in their faith community, with the kids at school. But when they're rejected by all those things, or those things are not pleasant, you go looking for it. And it doesn't make any sense to us because most of us have had those things. Well, something like a terrorist group isn't that far-fetched from a gang. A cult's not that far-fetched from a gang. They need someone to lead them, and Jim Jones comes along and leads them down to drink poison Kool-Aid, you know. So I'm not suggesting that there are not evil people in the Islamic world, but they're a little bit easier to spot because they dress so weird, right? And ours are a little bit harder to identify. But, and I let my mind go off track, which is never good. I was saying that we're talking about that. Oh, I know what I was going to say. It was profound. And that is,
Bless you.
thank you. If we take that gang understanding of how we get into gangs, and that you'll kill somebody to be initiated, because that's what they say you have to do. Look at normal Islamic families and communities, and being fed a constant diet of not all media, but the media, of we're against you, the Islamic faith is bad, da-da-da-da-da. Do you think that anti-Islamic attitude could push a few people to just say, well, I'll show them, I'm just going to, get violent? One of the things that I've studied, and I hope you studied years ago, is that if you take any ideology, and the one that was at that point was more like communism and democracy. But I think today I would just say the right wing and the left wing. If they're right here, there aren't profound differences. They're not life and death differences. But the farther they go in the extremeness of their thinking, they come around in a circle and they take up guns and want to kill each other. They become very much like each other. You see it my way, you die. No, you see it my way, you die. That's important. That's important. And so right now, we see a lot in our country, maybe other countries as well, is that what used to be kind of, give and take, up and down. So when you hear on the media, and I'm a media whatever, I watch a channel every morning, if you hear those left-wingers, those right-wingers, and you hear it over and over and over, you're talking about these folks, aren't you? More for the most part? Yeah. So, just something that I wanted to add. All right, we've got about 10 minutes left. I want you to have this time to do anything. I do want to remind you that I'm spending as much time on the Islam faith as I am because they are our neighbors. They work here at WhiteStone. There's a delightful lady that's one of the servers, and I hope you've seen her before. Well, if you came after COVID, you haven't, but she wears her jean. And the first time, Chuck, remember the first time she served us, and I said, "Wa alaikum assalam," and she was like, "Oh," but that's the traditional Arabic greeting, and so just treating someone like they're a human being. That's a good idea. Any questions about this sheet here? I have some.
Before moving to WhiteStone, I lived in Wilmington. And, my next door neighbor was a very devout Muslim. He was the president of the Muslim Society in Wilmington, and very devout. Probably the best neighbors that we ever had, the most generous neighbors. If at any time they knew there was any sickness, we always had chicken noodle soup. And we got pots and pots of chicken noodle soup.
They thought you were Jewish.
But any need that we had, they were right there. And do you need money? So you go into the house. Their youngest son, the first thing he did was to come up with a bowl of fruit and offer fruit. And I would take it and hold on to it. Well, he wanted me to eat it there. So, and
did they have to take your shoes off?
But no, not at all. No. And they did not wear the garb other than at holidays.
Okay.
And she was she had a master's degree. She came from Aleppo, which is the second largest city in Damascus. Damascus is being the largest. And she stopped watching the news because she couldn't stand watching her city being destroyed, and she was being treated for anxiety because of all the things that were taking place there. But he had a master's degree from Appalachian and came here at 16 years old and got his undergrad degree in UNC Charlotte, and then went to Appalachian and got his master's. Came out as a teacher and couldn't make enough money as a teacher to support the 4 children that they had. So what did he do? He bought a convenience store. And then he got a second convenience store. And then he started buying rental homes. And he has now amassed quite a few rental homes right now, more than he can get people to take care of now. But from a standpoint of a person who was far from ever being radical, he was not at all. Neither one of them were. And her family are once had 2 sisters that were doctors as well. So they were well-educated people. And he and I would talk about our religion, and I had him come to a Bible study group that we had, and he put it all out there. This is what we do. This is what we believe, and so forth. And and I think for the most part, the people that were there accepted the Muslim religion and coexist with it. And there was one couple that were really upset that we even brought that person in to a Christian church, because they had a fixed attitude about them. So all I can say from my knowledge of them and the things that they did, I was not tempted to become a Muslim at all, but I accepted and admired them for their attitudes and how diligent they were in being a part of their religion. And, so they are, as you say, expanding in Wilmington.
And if someone had come and said, hey, Ted, we're working on this thing, we're going to get rid of them and send them out of the country, you would not have found that attractive, that idea.
No.
So, and you know, I know that you don't have the answer, but if I had you to guess whether that family is fairly typical or atypical of the Islams in the country, I suspect you'd say my guess is that it's not that unusual. You know, again, and they don't even wear the hijab and all the other things. Now, I just went absolutely blank. I am so sorry. There's something going on with my eyes. I wish you could see what I'm looking at through my eyes. I can't see you all at all. I know you well enough that I can identify you, but there's just this fog. I don't know what it is.
When I was younger, I dated a girl who was Catholic, and my mother was adamant about that. The fact that and I went to midnight mass on Christmas, and oh, she could not get over the fact that I would do that, and because that was the attitude at that point with Catholics, and I have a good friend in Wilmington, and she doesn't look at the Catholic as being Christians. And her father was a Baptist minister.
Oh, there you go. I tell you what. And your mother, although we would probably vote that she was wrong to do that, she absolutely would believe, without a doubt, that she was looking out for you, what was going to be best for you down the road, and so forth and so on. Yeah, it's just amazing. Now think about Catholics, of all people. The very first Christians were Catholics. You know, the universal church, Jesus Church, and then it started getting all broken up. And I'm not saying that there are a lot of issues with the Catholic Church, just like with us, but I taught this same workshop, basically, pretty much, at my church that I've been a member of for. And clergy, we're not really members of churches, but we have to be connected to a church. And so the church I'm still connected to, I taught this there, I don't know if you remember or not, I want to say 10, 15 years ago, not a long time in my life. And I taught it in Lake Chapel. And it was in the summer when we did those, you know, all the groups came together. And the Islam did not go well at all. And I was going to have my mom come up and talk, not my mom, but the chaplain at Duke. And there were several people in that group, I remember them to this day, that made it absolutely clear to me in an ugly tone that would not happen. And it surprised me and it hurt me. Because I just knew that my church had the smartest and the best people in the whole world in it, you know, and they wouldn't be like that. So, it's hard to learn and remain intolerant.
But like Ted said, it doesn't mean that you embrace something, right? Yeah. Any more than I would expect you to put vinegar on your french fries, you know. But it's nice to know that it's done and that it's not, you know, a weird person that people do it. So. Okay, very quickly, anything that you just picked up on this sheet, I don't know if you had a chance to even look at it. I haven't read it. Did something, when you look at the 5 branches, there was one thing I hope would jump out at you. Remember when I told you, just say yes, when I told you about the Sunni and the Sarah and how they came about? Well, it's like 2 equal groups. This group believed this and this group believed that, and it was all about inheritance from Muhammad, remember? One group thought that Muhammad didn't name an heir, therefore it should be the will of the people. And the other group said, no, it should be an heir of Muhammad's, whether he named the heir or not. Well, how many Sunnis are there?
200 million.
That's a lot. Because the going number, and we know the numbers change every second, but the going number is like 1.8 billion Muslims in the world. Okay, you go from the B down to the Shias, and when you see Shia, remember that on the news or just about any time you hear that, it's going to be referred to as Shiite. So don't think it's 2 different things. 200 million. Can you do that math? That's a strange ratio. And so, me being me, my first thought was, well, how come there's so much conflict? The Sunnis could just trounce all over them. It wasn't a very good thought. And then you jump down to just 15 million for everybody and 3 million. And my personal opinion, which is based on limited knowledge at all, with Sufism is sort of a mystical faith. It has to do with sort of a mystical practices, which you will find in Christianity and other faiths. And I think that's one of the reasons they don't know what the number is. And so some people put it higher, some people put it lower. So anyway, I thought you might find that interesting. And then just some odds and ends. There are a lot of people that would go on Jeopardy and absolutely be positive that Muslims are bigamists or whatever. They have multiple wives. Is it legal in Islam to have multiple wives? It is legal. The best research says universally it runs about 1% or fewer. Is it legal in the United States to have more than one wife?
No.
But the Mormons, it is legal for a Mormon, in their faith it is. So do the Mormons have multiple wives? In fact, one study I read said it's about the same for Christians, because Christians actually do sometimes have more than one wife, regardless of their faith background. So I thought that was interesting. And just a lot of little positives. How many of you don't have to respond, but have you not heard consistently that if you're a Muslim girl, you're going to marry who your daddy tells you to marry, whether you want to or not?
Mm-hmm.
I've heard that. And I probably accepted that that was true. But they have arranged marriages. And when I look at our divorce rate, who am I to differ, you know? They're doing better than 50%, we're not, but anyway. So they do have arranged marriages, but if Ted and Virginia have been brought together by their families and they're like 16 or 18 or whatever, and they start to get to know it, they don't date like we do, which is also probably not bad, but spend time together, get to know each other. It's sort of expected that they're going to marry. And Virginia sees the light and realizes that he's just a bad person. She cannot bear the thought of being married to him. They don't force that. So I thought that was incredible. And in fact, one of the things, I hope I wrote it down here. Yes, I thought this was good. Forced marriage, on the other hand, occurs when a man or woman is coerced by the family to marry using threats, emotional blackmail, fraud, and even bribes, arranged against the person's will without consent or consent under duress.
That is not a marriage in Islam. It's oppression and abuse. That's what it is, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. So, and then there are other things on here that we are, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. We were doing good as usual, I talked too much. Well, I pray, literally pray that this has been helpful to you. I don't have the knowledge of a drop in the bucket, but hopefully our just a general feeling maybe has been encouraged. And especially since they're moving faster than we are at this point to grow. So, is there anyone that feels called to close us in prayer? Next week we will go to our Jewish brothers and sisters. Loving God, you gave us a brain. I don't believe it was an afterthought. I think it was, from the very beginning, one of your very best gifts. And Lord, we believe that you want us to use our brains. And so we just ask that you continue to guide us into opportunities to learn and opportunities to evaluate and not to just take hold of anything that comes our way, but to truly use our reason, to use our experience in culture and in church, and to use our scripture always as a foundation for, literally, what would you have us to do. Go with us now, Lord. Thank you for this opportunity, and lead and direct us as we move forward. Amen. All right.
Thank you.
See you next week for Judith.